This week, Kawasaki announced a 2025 update to their Ninja 1000 SX Sports Tourer with a new 1100 engine and also a fancy up-spec'd SE version. And look, I think if you wanted a good value, straightforward sports tourer without the tall suspension that you get on so many crossover style bikes now, well yes, there aren't that many options on the market anymore, but this was certainly up there with the best of them, if not being the best. So does this 2025 update do enough to keep it up there? Or could Kawasaki have done a little bit more? Well, in this video, we'll go through all of the details to find out. First up, let's talk about that engine change, which they recently announced also on the Versys 1100 Adventure Tourer. And it's the same inline-4 layout as the previous generation, of course, but capacity has gone up from 1043cc to 1099. Now look, there's no mention of the peak power figure in this press release, and that's probably because it's actually gone down a bit. The previous gen made 140 horses at 10,000 RPM, whereas this new one makes 134 at 9,000 RPM. And so that might rightly have you wondering how they've got less peak power out of a bigger engine. Now, the marketing spiel in the press release says there's an emphasis on usable mid-range and torque across the rev range, and of course that is going to be handy on this style of bike. And while I don't have the dyno charts to compare the entire rev range, it has to be said there is indeed a small boost in peak torque with 113 Newton meters now versus the 111 of the 1000 SX. But look, I suspect that's not actually the real reason, and what it all comes down to is manufacturing efficiency. You see, I mentioned the Versys 1100 was also announced this week, replacing the Versys 1000, and if you look at the 2024 model year, you actually had two quite different states of tune between the Versys 1000 and the Ninja 1000 SX. Both inline-4s around the 1000cc mark, sharing most of their componentry, but on the spec sheet, you got a different peak power figure, a different peak torque figure, and also all of the gear ratios were different too. These two new 1100 models though, we'll put them side by side, and the fuel consumption figures, the gear ratios are all identical. Peak power, peak torque, emissions, well they're so similar that you could put it down to a difference in the shape of the silencer there. And so what I suspect they've done here is basically tuned the engine so it's appropriate for both bikes, and that way they only have to make one engine. The result is you're sacrificing a bit of peak power at the top end because the 1100 SX doesn't rev that extra 1000 RPM that you used to get on the 1000 SX. So look, it does feel a little bit cheeky, I'll admit that, although I reckon in the real world when it comes to, most of your riding, it's probably pretty rare that you access the very top of the rev range, and it's probably only those people who really like to thrash their bikes that are going to have any chance of noticing. That's my take anyway, but let me know what you think down in the comments below. Now, they do say the extra torque means you can be a little bit lazier with the gears, so the non-thrashers might like that. And also, longer 5th and 6th gears, which they say is possible because of that extra torque, means it shouldn't be working quite so hard when you're cruising on the motorway. On top of that, the up and down quick shifter now works from as low as 1500 RPM, so it should be more usable around town and that sort of thing. And like the Versys 1100, which gets pretty much all of these changes too, you got a USB-C port fitted as standard for keeping your devices juiced up in the cockpit. Also, the rear brake gets a boost in diameter, so it goes from 250mm to 260, so it should offer a little bit more power. And that's always a good thing in my book when you tow up with luggage on a bike like this, where a bit of extra rear brake can be really useful in getting the bike to stop quickly without all that weight lurching right forward. Now, tyres, they also say are improved with the latest Bridgestone Battleaxe S23s. And if you look back through some of the reviews of previous generations of this bike, it was one of the criticisms that the OE tyres were, in fact, a bit useless. I think it was the last generation they fitted with the S22s to improve the handling quite dramatically, and in my experience, this is a really good line of tyres that suits a sports tourer like this really quite well, and so it's definitely a good thing that they've continued with it. Perhaps the most exciting new announcement here, though, is the fact that they're now offering an SE version. You see, SE is usually the suffix they give their more premium models, with better performance and better comfort, although understandably usually at an extra cost. cost. Now, I don't believe that previous generations of this bike were ever available with an SE, and so for some dedicated Ninja 1000 SX or now Ninja 1100 SX owners who want the best possible spec on this format of bike, then I'm sure this is going to be music to their ears. The key update, I think, is the brakes. You've now got Brembo's M4.32 radially mounted monoblock calipers, a Brembo master cylinder as well, Brembo rotors, and also steel braided hoses as standard. But then also at the rear, you've got an Öhlins S46 shock, and so I think it's fair to say you'll probably get a bit more quality to the ride, along with heated grips as standard. Now, if all those goodies aren't tempting enough, there is another thing that differentiates it, and that's the fact that while both models are available in black, it's only going to be the SE model now that's available in their signature green, and so I think that'll probably seal the deal, especially for the hardcore Kawasaki fan. Most of the rest of the spec, the chassis, the tech are all carried over, so I won't go into too much detail here, but of course, with it being a 2025 update, there is a little bit of an increase in the price. The standard bike is now £12,249, which is, to be fair, only £100 up on the base price of the previous gen when you bought it in black. To me, that doesn't seem too bad, although I'm sure I'm going to get a few comments saying that £100 more for less peak power does seem like a bit of a raw deal, and if that is your priority, the fastest bike possible, then I totally understand that. The SE comes in at £13,999, and while £1,750 extra is not insignificant, I would probably say if you took the base bike and tried to upgrade the brakes and shock and fitted the heated grips, then it's definitely going to come to more than that. As always, I'd love to know what you think of this update, so do let me know down in the comments below. And as for the question I asked at the top of this video as to whether they've improved what was already a really good bike and a great seller too, well, I think it's probably a bit of a mixed bag. There are certainly some little tweaks here and there that look valuable, and also that SE model does look very tempting. And I still think in the real world that extra 1,000 revs was probably very rarely accessed, so I'm definitely expecting this to be a slightly better ride when I hopefully get to review one. But of course, horsepower numbers do sell bikes, whether you like it or not, and so I'm sure you can see why they skipped that small detail in the press release. That's why we're here though, to dig a little bit deeper, so do hit subscribe if you want to see more of the latest motorcycle news like this right here on MOTOBOB. I'll also put my review of the 1000 SX up on the screen now in case you haven't seen it already, so do give that a watch. And massive thanks for watching today, and we'll see you in the next video.